And we saw this constantly throughout the war. We saw this as the British, as they moved in. This was an incredible story. I don't know if you've ever heard of this story. But after the British came in on New York, in the Bay of New York, they all unloaded their ships with their 40,000 plus men, and they were getting ready to go attack George Washington, who had moved up into New York. He actually had moved up into a place where he was kind of pinched. He was cut off. And so they immediately started putting their armies. They were going to swing around and go up and go cut them off. They were going to cut off this little rebellion before it even got going. But all of a sudden, and there were these Germans they made all these posters of Washington and all these other people, and they were hanging them. They were going to burn them. They weren't posters. They were like dummies full of straw. What was that?
Effigy.
Yeah, effigy. Effigy? See, I knew it was effigy, but I thought I was saying it wrong, and I didn't want to say. But anyway, so they had the effigies of these different guys, and they had them hung, and they went to light them, and right as it was lit, it was burning, this amazing wind came from heaven, and it blew, and it blew everything, and there was a hailstorm, and everybody cleared away and went and hid because the hail was so bad. And when the hail stopped, they came back, and everything was consumed. The hay and the wood and all that. But the George Washington was never touched. That next day, they went to go to end the rebellion and cut George Washington off. And they had him cornered in the very tip of this. He was backed, and there was nowhere to go. He was backed up against a river. And as he was cornered, they decided the next day that they would come in, and that was going to be the day where they were just going to finish all the troops off. And in the middle of the night, a heavy fog came in. A heavy storm came in, and all of Washington's armies escaped. This happened multiple times. There was another story about how they were fighting, and it was wintertime. And in the middle of the winter, there was mud, and there was no retreat because of the wagon wheels and all this. And so they were stuck. And the British Army knew, once again, victory was theirs the next day because of the mud. They were locked down. And God sent down a cold wind and froze the roads. In the middle of the night, they were able to leave on the roads that was hard as concrete. The next morning, when the British soldiers woke up to pursue them, the morning thaw left, and they got stuck in their own mud. George Washington, he was saved once again. We all know about the stories of Valley Forge and the horrible winter that was. While still all these soldiers of the British were there, these large in number soldiers, the Americans' army, it kept reducing because people had to go home, and they had to take care of their farms, and they had to take care of their families. And at one point they did a count at Valley Forge, and the number was down to 5,012 men. Things were looking bad. They had no food. There were loyalists that wouldn't give food to the American soldiers that were fighting. They were for the British. And so George Washington, he had a constant habit of spending it. He started off every day with an hour in the Word. And there was a Quaker who heard him. He was in the woods praying, and there's a quote given by this Quaker where he didn't know it was Washington. He snuck up on him, and he heard him praying, and he's saying, Lord, I need your divine intervention. This is your army. These are your people, and I'm seeking your divine intervention. They were out of food and had none. This is a documented case where there was a case of fish. I don't know what kind of fish they were. I didn't know what they were. But the fish had hatched early and moved upriver, and it was a large abundance amount of fish. And the soldiers ran and got as many fish they could, and they salted them and saved them. It was God's providence that saved them time and time and time and time again. And so there's two reasons that we talk about this today. One reason is because it's our birthday, and we need to understand as a country, what does it mean to be American? What is American exceptionalism? What does it mean for us? What does it mean? What it means is this, that we put on a new mind of Christ, and we say, like George Washington and the 56 founders of our country say, is God, we don't want to do it our way, or we don't want man to be exalted, or we don't want a king to lead us. But God, it's in you that we trust. It's in you that we want to follow. It's in you who is our source, and it's you who is our direction, and it's you the one that we're going to follow after. And as we as Christians do that, we look at our country and we can see that our country is in a lot of trouble in a lot of different ways right now. And sometimes as Americans, we can say, well, let's just forget it. America's kind of gone. Or maybe you don't think that, but I've heard that. So we say, whatever, I'm not as patriotic as I once was because look at where our country is going. But you know what happens? When God sees us as His believers, stand up against the giant and say, no, we're going to stand on that in which God has given us. We stand up to that British army, the largest army in the world. Or we stand up to Goliath. Or we stand up to the circumstances or whatever is against us. God says, if you will pray, and if you'll humble yourself, and if you'll seek me, you know what He does? He gives us the mind of Christ, and He helps us to be able to find a way out. Amen. God established this country of America, and He loves this country because it was established according to His will. This is the way in which He wants to govern. He wants to be the leader of our people. We saw that in the children of Israel, where God was upset because the children of Israel said, we want a king. And God said, I want to be your king. I want to guide you and I want to direct you. And instead of having a king who rules over these people, God said it. He said, if you have a king, the king will take the money from you, and they'll take your sons from you, and they'll take your daughters, and they'll take your donkeys, and they'll take a tenth of you. God says that. And the people said, we want a king, we want a king. So God said, okay, you'll get a king, and that's what they got. But as a country, we said the opposite. Our forefathers, they had the wisdom to be able to say, our country is not based, and it's not great because of a group of people that are here. No, we're a melting pot. What makes America amazing is that we have people from all over the world, but people from all over the world who recognize we're going to do it God's way. That we're going to flip the table and put the leader or the president at the bottom, and he's responsible to everybody else instead of the opposite way around. That's what we want in our country. It's one of the things. The Bible. Okay, in 1781, it was the last battle at Yorktown. Once again, we didn't know it was the last battle, but General Cornwallis, he had the ability to escape because Washington was coming in to surround. They had how many ships? 450, or at least they started off with that, but the rebels had blown up a whole bunch of them. I love that. Don't you guys love The Patriot? I mean, when the 4th of July comes around, don't you watch it? So kids don't watch it. It's really violent and gory. But you know what? It was violent and gory. You know what happens? When we say, yes, God, I'm going to do what our forefathers did, and I'm going to trust in you, and I'm going to think according to the way you think, the whole time during the Revolutionary War, it looked like they were losing. They weren't winning. But you know what? They stayed consistent and they trusted God. And God showed that no other way was it possible for us to win the Revolutionary War had it not been for God. Amen. He wants us to know that. In your lives, in your situation, you know what He wants to do? He wants you to know that even though it may not look like you're winning, or even it may not look like that you're succeeding in whatever area that is that you're struggling in, He says, if you'll put on my thinking, or if you'll put on a new way of thinking, which is the Beatitudes, which is Matthew 6, which is this word. It's this word. As we put on this thinking, it transforms us. Now, don't walk around wearing a Bible. That's not going to help you. Okay? But I will tell you this. So with Cornwallis, they go to retreat, and what happens? An amazing storm comes up. And it's such an amazing, overwhelming storm that already loaded all of the troops into the ships. And as they loaded the troops, the storm was so overwhelming that people died in the ships. They had to unload them. And as soon as they unloaded them, what happened? Bam! Washington took them. The war was over. 8 years later, 8 years of difficulty. You're going to have years of difficulty. You're going to have difficulty that happens. But if you'll put on the mind of Christ, and if you'll seek Him, and if you'll read in the Bible, and you'll apply it to Him, you know what God's going to make you be? You're going to be the George Washingtons. You're going to be the ones who stand up for who He is inside of your life. One of the first things that George Washington, when he declared too, as soon as the war was won, is Congress printed 20,000 copies of the Bible. So one of the first things they did, it was illegal to print a Bible in England. Normal people like you and me, we couldn't own a Bible because the aristocrats had to have it, or the government or the clergy had to have it. They didn't want the Bible in your own hands. You know why? Because when you get this in your hands and when you get this in your head, you're dangerous. You're dangerous because you think differently, because you're unpredictable. You know why? Because you're free. This is the land of the free and the home of the brave. This makes you brave. This gives you the ability to stand in front of a government who says, if you preach this, we're going to kill you. You say, my life is not my own. I don't care. I'm going to do what's right. This gives you the ability to stand. This gives you the ability to bring freedom, to live in freedom, even though you're locked away in jail like Paul was. For the majority of this that was written, he was in more freedom than those who put him in jail. That's right. That's what makes us different as Americans. We're free, and we're free because we stand on the biblical principles that are based in this. As a country, we're free because of this. As individuals, God says, put on the mind of Christ. When you put this on, I make you free. I set you free. I bring freedom that comes up from you that you don't even understand in and of yourself. 20,000 Bibles were created. Do you know what they were created for? If you want to know what they're created for, you can look in the front. It says it was printed by the United States Congress. It was printed to give to our schools. You know what until 70 years ago, you know what the number one main textbook was in our schools? It was the Bible. It was King James Version, let me tell you. Think of that. Think of a little first grader learning to read on King James Version. You know why public schools were created? Because our Congress wanted to make sure that every one of our kids were learning the Bible. You know why Congress wanted our kids to learn the Bible? It's because the Bible is what makes us free. The Bible is what makes us exceptional as Americans. We're exceptional because we have this inside of us. What's happening today? What are they taking away? What's being removed from us? What's making us, we're no longer being transformed according to His Word, but we're doing that verse opposite. We're being conformed to the rest of the world. Let's do healthcare like Europe. And I don't want to get into politics. But boy, I could, let me tell you. Psalms 33:12 says, blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord. Hey, you want to know what a blessed nation we've been? You want to know we have become a superpower. We've become one of the most amazing nations in all of the history of the world. But it's not because we're great. It's because He's great. These principles that we are able to see because we're part of. When I travel around the world, there's other countries and they hate us. There's other countries that they see us and they think we have an arrogance about us. Not all of them, but there's a lot of people that hate us. You know why? Because they're not free and we live in this freedom. There's a difference about who we are. It's available to them. Many of them, it's not available to them because they don't have the basic freedoms. They don't have the fight for ideas, and which is so important to us. Which is so important. John Adams, he once said, the general principles for which our fathers achieved independence were the general principles of Christianity. They were based on the Bible. We read or we hear the arguments about the fight of church and state, which is not in our Constitution, which is not in our Declaration of Independence, where it talks about that. It's some letters that were written that we're talking about. Thomas Jefferson talked about it. But you know, with all that we see about the Bible, you know, they did want a separation of church and state, but you know what they wanted separation from? If you looked at Great Britain, where the state told the church what they would believe, and the church told you what you believed, and if you choose to believe different, guess what happened to you? Off with the head. It's what happened to you.